In 1940, Adolf Hitler's war machine had a problem. The Nazi blitzkrieg had swallowed France in weeks, crushed Poland, and cornered Europe. Maps of the continent were painted entirely in Axis red, except for one tiny stubborn patch of grey right in the dead centre. Switzerland. To the German High Command, the Swiss were an anomaly. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and lacked a massive standing tank army. Yet Hitler repeatedly delayed Operation Tannenbaum, the invasion of Switzerland. Why? Because the Swiss didn't plan to fight the German army on a standard battlefield. They had a secret weapon that couldn't be bombed, outflanked, or intimidated. They weaponized gravity, geology, and elevation. They turned an entire European nation into a giant passive military trap. This is the logic of the Swiss National Redoubt and how geometry can stop an empire. If you look at Switzerland's geography on a macro scale, it's a nation split into two entirely different operational theatres. First, you have the Mittelland, the flat, rolling central plateau. This is the economic heart of the country, where 80% of the population lives and where cities like Zurich, Geneva, and Bern sit. But surrounding that plateau like a massive, jagged amphitheatre are the Alps, a brutal wall of solid granite rising up to 15,000 feet, cut through by only a handful of narrow, claustrophobic mountain passes. In the late 1930s, as the shadow of Nazi Germany expanded, Swiss General Henry Guisan sat down with a map and faced a terrifying mathematical reality. The Swiss military were a citizen militia. They lacked a massive, mechanized standing army. If German panzer divisions rolled across the flat Mittelland, using the devastating Blitzkrieg doctrine that crushed France, the Swiss army would be flanked, surrounded, and completely annihilated within a matter of days. So, Guisan implemented a strategy that defied all conventional military pride. He decided to completely concede the cities. The doctrine was called the Schweizer Reduit, the Swiss National Redoubt. The logic was a brilliant application of the force-to-space ratio. In flat terrain, a highly mobile mechanized army can maximize its numbers, speed, and air support. But in the tight, vertical confines of a mountain pass, numbers cease to matter. A narrow valley creates a physical bottleneck where an entire army corps can be held off by a single, well-entrenched machine gun nest. Guisan calculated that if Switzerland tried to defend its entire border, they would be weak everywhere. But if they concentrated their forces, they could be unbreakable in one specific place. If invaded, the Swiss military would fight a brief, delaying action on the plains to allow for a massive, synchronized retreat. They would abandon their homes, their factories, and their cities, funneling their entire fighting force deep in the Alpine core. They were deliberately leaving the flat ground behind. By doing this, they were forcing the most advanced mechanical army on Earth to fight a war on terrain where tanks couldn't drive, heavy artillery couldn't deploy, and aircraft couldn't find targets. The Swiss had discovered the ultimate rule of the geography of war. You don't need to defeat your enemy's army if you can successfully force them to fight against the Earth itself. But a mountain fortress is only secure if you can lock the front doors. And Switzerland didn't just close the doors to the Alps, they wired them to explode. During the mid-20th century, the Swiss government quieted the geopolitical anxieties of being a small nation by implementing a total war engineering doctrine. It wasn't just a military strategy, it was integrated directly into the nation's civilian construction blueprint. They called it permanent structural pre-demolition. Whenever the Swiss built a new highway, a railway tunnel through a mountain, or a massive concrete bridge spanning a deadly alpine gorge, The military didn't wait for a crisis to secure it. The demolition charges were designed into the original architectural blueprints. Instead of drilling frantic holes during an invasion, Swiss engineers cast hollow, dedicated demolition chambers directly into the reinforced concrete foundations and structural pillars during the initial pour. Over 3,000 separate bridges, tunnels, highways, and rail lines across the country were permanently rigged with hidden, military-grade TNT and liquid explosives. The logistical calculations behind this infrastructure were terrifyingly precise. If an invading column of tanks crossed the northern border, the Swiss didn't need to fight them tooth and nail on the asphalt. A single encrypted radio command or physical detonation key would trigger a synchronized nationwide cataclysm. Within seconds, the massive spans of the Rhineland bridges would drop cleanly into the rivers below. The ceilings of the great alpine tunnels, like the Gotthard, would collapse under thousands of tons of fractured granite. Mountain highways would simply cease to exist, blasted sideways into yawning valleys. This effectively turned the nation's entire multi-billion-dollar transportation network into a latent, passive weapon. An invading force wouldn't just be dealing with an enemy army, they would be staring down an impassable, artificial wasteland of jagged concrete and choked passes. The Swiss sent an unmistakable, calculated message to the global superpowers. You can launch an invasion to seize our geography, but we will mathematically destroy the infrastructure that makes that geography valuable to you. But what happens once the doors are locked and the bridges are blown? If the Swiss military successfully cut off the valleys and retreated into the mountains, they couldn't just sit in damp caves waiting to starve. They needed to survive, communicate, and strike back. To achieve this, Swiss engineers turned the Alps into an architectural ant farm. They carved a massive, decentralized network of hidden, self-sustaining subterranean cities directly into the solid granite. We are talking about subterranean megastructures like Fort Fergals, Fort de Airolo, and Fort San Carlo. These weren't mere fallout shelters. They were fully realized underground military ecosystems buried under hundreds of feet of blast-absorbent rock. The engineering required to keep thousands of soldiers operational deep inside a mountain for months at a time was a masterpiece of life support logistics. First, they had to solve the problem of air. If an invading force used chemical weapons or choked the valley with smoke, a standard bunker would become a tomb. Swiss engineers designed massive multi-stage air filtration systems that drew air from hidden fissures high up in the mountain peaks, passing it through advanced particulate and gas filters before pumping it through miles of underground shafts. Second, they solved the energy equation. Deep inside the granite, completely isolated from the civilian power grid, these forts ran on massive submarine-style diesel generators backed by hidden reservoirs of millions of gallons of fuel and fresh alpine water tablets tapped directly from inside the mountain rock. They featured fully staffed underground hospitals, massive automated bakeries, and living quarters designed to maintain absolute operational readiness for up to a year without a single soldier ever seeing the sun. But these hidden fortresses weren't just designed to survive an invasion, they were designed to smash it. The Swiss weaponized the rock faces themselves using casemate artillery. They tunneled horizontally out toward the sheer cliffs of the valleys, installing massive, heavy-caliber artillery cannons behind heavily armored steel shutters that perfectly matched the texture and color of the surrounding granite. From the valley floor, these guns were completely invisible. They couldn't be targeted by enemy tanks, and their deep granite shielding made them entirely immune to aerial bombardment. The geometry of these gun emplacements were meticulously calibrated. Every fortress was positioned to create overlapping fields of deadly crossfire with neighboring forts. If an enemy army attempted to march through a single bottleneck valley, they would be systematically shelled from multiple directions by an invisible, heavily armored ghost network that they could neither see nor shoot back at. The Swiss didn't just hide inside the mountains, they turned the mountains into the ultimate barrels of their guns. Today, if you hike through the idyllic Swiss Alps, you are walking through a decommissioned war zone. Many of the explosive charges tucked inside those bridges have finally been diffused, and the solid granite fortresses that have taken on a bizarre afterlife repurposed into high-security servers for Swiss banks, ultra-private data vaults, or eccentric museums. But looking back at the bloodiest century in human history, a glaring question remains. Did the geometry of the redoubt actually work? Critics of Swiss neutrality often point to a cynical truth, that Switzerland survived World War II not because of its mountains, but because it made itself economically useful to the Axis powers, laundering Nazi gold and manufacturing precision components for the German war machine. But that is only half the ledger. Economics alone cannot explain why an expansionist dictator like Adolf Hitler, who routinely swallowed useful economic territories without hesitation, ultimately backed down from Operation Tannenbaum. The true answer lies in a concept known in geopolitical theory as calculated unprofitability. The Swiss National Redoubt was never designed to achieve a glorious, crushing battlefield victory over a superpower. Its math was entirely defensive. It was engineered to alter the enemy's cost-benefit analysis. General Guisan's geometric strategy made the price of invading Switzerland so astronomical that it neutralized the value of the territory itself. The German High Command calculated that even if they successfully broke through the border, they would inherit a shattered transportation network, completely severed Alpine rail links, and a protracted, bloody guerrilla war against an invisible enemy entrenched inside millions of tons of solid granite. The Swiss didn't have to win the war, they just had to make losing it look like an attractive option for the invader. This is the ultimate lesson of the geography of war. True sovereignty is rarely given, it's engineered. Switzerland didn't maintain its legendary centuries of peace through passive pacifism or naive trust in international treaties. They did it through armed defiance, structural planning, and managed geography. They proved to the world that a small nation can dictate terms to global empires, provided they understand the cold, hard physics of their own terrain. Whether it's the Asante weaponizing the dense canopy of the West African forest, the Shona using the pure friction of stone to lock their empire together, or the Swiss rigging the very Alps to explode, history belongs to those who know how to turn the earth into a weapon. Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. If you were an invading general, would you have risked entering the Swiss trap?